talk about free software. First, I'm going to deviate from what I normally do at the start of presentations. This is me. And for the first time in a long while, I am currently not busy. And I'm sure you all know what that means. And this is mainly for all the people who are going to be watching this on YouTube a couple of months from now. But this is what I do. I have been building web applications since 1992. I had business cards with Webmaster written on them. I do C#, I do JavaScript, I do HTML, CSS, I design distributed systems. I have been a cloud architect at certain points along the way. I give presentations, I give awesome presentations about it. Look, it says it there on the slide. Something that I really enjoy doing is companies will hire me and they'll say, this is what we do, and we want you to write a fun talk about that. And I'm like, really? So I wrote a talk for Schneider Electric about electricity. And I wrote a talk for Just Eat about takeaway delivery. And I love that, because you find all the cool stuff that they've all forgotten about, because they do this for a living. I teach people to build software. I teach .NET. I teach architecture, distributed systems design. I teach people to give presentations. If you have a bunch of people in your company who you wish somebody would just sit them down and go, that's not how you do PowerPoint, Brian, I can help you with that. I invent programming languages for fun. Now, I realize the odds of anyone ever paying me to do that are vanishingly slim, but if you have some kind of weird pot of money that you need to give to somebody to make a joke programming language, hi! I make videos, and yes, you can hire me. Come and say hello. Drop me an email, dylan@dylanbeattie.net. And now, let's talk about working really hard and not getting any money for it. Let's talk about free software. There is a cycle that I'm sure all of you folks in this room can relate to, which is the geek cycle of infatuation. Because first, you become aware that something exists. You didn't know about it 30 seconds ago, but now you've seen it. It's just popped up on social media, or someone showed it to you, or you've seen someone else has got it, and you're like, I need it. I will never be happy until I have that thing. And it could be anything. It could be a piece of hardware. It could be a piece of software. It could be a library, a framework, a template, any of these things. But you've seen it, and you want it, and you are going to have it. And so you order one, or you download one, and you get the box, and you open the box, oh, it's here. And then you have that moment. Like, this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. I'm sure the person in the sales meeting said we could deploy custom workflows using GitHub actions. But I can't see a GitHub button. I just see a dialog where I can paste my JSON. That's not what we signed up for here. They said this thing would play MP3s, but now it's talking about something called a Deezer subscription. What's one of those? And at this point, you have the point where you know that the technology in your hands is technically capable of doing the thing you want. It has all the right parts, and there is no reason they cannot be made to work together in the right order, but for some reason, you cannot do that thing because somebody has said no. Now, all you folks out there, you've configured your ID, you've got your color scheme, you've got your fonts, you've got everything. When you get a piece of kit set up just the way you want it, it's beautiful. You know what I'm talking about. All my hacker friends out there, like, I can't edit code in this, the fonts are wrong. The rest of us, we're like, I need to change the font in this thing. Yeah, access to, I can't do that. That's only available in the Platinum Enterprise Edition. Oh no, that's not covered by your license. Oh no, you could do that. We just don't want you to. We just, no, you don't matter to us, and we don't care about your life. You're not gonna do that thing. In 1980, Xerox donated a laser printer to the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, there was an AI lab at MIT in 1980. We were about 2-3 years away from general artificial intelligence, like we've been since 1964. Now, Xerox and MIT, both massive, massive names in the history of software and computer science and information technology. Xerox invented Windows. Xerox invented mice. Xerox invented laser printers. Xerox invented a whole bunch of astonishing things and then buried them all because they were really frightened of jeopardizing their photocopying business. Which is why the word Xerox today just means it's a photocopy. That's what a Xerox is. And MIT invented passwords and Ethernet and email and the software that took human beings to the moon and blockchain and the Roomba and functional programming, and maybe this idea of free software. Because one of the people who was working there at the time. This laser printer had a problem. And the problem was that it was prone to paper jams, just like a photocopier, if any of you remember what one of those is. And so the thing about a photocopier is you kind of stood in front of it, and you got your paper there, and once in a while, and it'll get stuck, and you'll open the door, and it always reminds you of trying to get a dog to let go of a frisbee. You're trying to get the piece of paper out, and then slap the door and slap it, and push the button, and off it goes again. But you're right there when it happened. You know it happened. Now, this thing was basically a Xerox photocopier with a network card and some really clever software in it. And the problem was that when it jammed, you didn't know. Because you'd sent your print job, and then you're like, I'll go and pick it up later. I'll go and get a cup of coffee. And you'd be like, printer's jammed. Printer's been jammed all morning. There's like 100 pages. So you'd take the paper and fix it up. And one of the people working there at the time was this gentleman, Richard Stallman. Who has opinions about Richard Stallman? Talk to your therapist. This is not that talk. Richard Stallman had an idea, and I don't think we can tell the story of free and open source software without acknowledging the role that Stallman has played in it, controversial as he might be. He was like, this thing has software, it's connected to the network, it knows when the paper's jammed because there's a little light comes on. Why don't we reprogram it so that when it gets a paper jam, it'll tell everyone on the network that the printer's jammed, so whoever's nearest can go over and unjam it. Sounds like a good idea, right? Nice solution. So he goes to Xerox and says, hey, can I have the control software for the laser printer you gave us? And Xerox says no, for no reason other than they had been told not to give Stallman the software because they didn't want him to have it. Now, there are two versions of this story, two interpretations. One of them is that this incident galvanized Stallman, RMS as he's sometimes known from his login initials. It galvanized him to committing the rest of his life and dedicating his career to the cause of free and open software. There is another version that says it pissed him off so much he is still butthurt 40 years later. I think both versions are kind of true. But he's talked a lot about the Xerox laser printer incident and how that was the origin of what would become free software, the free software movement. But what does this word free mean? Because there's a bunch of things that are free, right? The classic interpretation, people talk about software, they're like, software can be free as in speech, or it can be free as in beer. We got free speech, we got free beer. Let's talk about free beer. Great idea, right? Who wants a beer? Yeah. Like, yeah, and you didn't have to pay for it, which is awesome, because this is London, and it's like £8 a pint now. But let's say we give everyone a pint. And some of you are like, that's a nice, refreshing pint. Some of you are like, I'm driving. I can't do anything with this. Some of you are like, actually, I'm 17. I can't drink for medical, dietary, religious. There's all kinds of reasons why you may not be able to just take the pint and drink it. Maybe you already had one. Maybe you already had 4, Phil. Maybe. So what can you do with it? Can you keep it? Who wants to take a pint home with them on the aeroplane and give it to their family? You can't do that. Do you want to sell it? Oh, you get in big trouble if you sell pints without a license. You can't keep it and come back and enjoy it next year. Beer doesn't keep. So free beer, unless you are prepared to enjoy it in the very specific way in which that gift is intended, it's not actually free at all. It is incredibly restricted. Now, we have a lot of software out there which is free as in beer. It is software that we use without paying for it. But we have no freedom. We can't take our data and our networks and our friends and move it onto another platform. We can't change the way we interact with it. We can try to filter out all the algorithms and the adverts and all the bot shit crap that shows up in our feeds, but we can't do that. This is free as in beer, as in it doesn't cost you any money, but you will do exactly what we tell you to do with the free stuff we're giving you. Now, software is valuable stuff, right? Software is expensive. We've all spent a fortune, and our employers even more so, on the software that we use. Show of hands, who owns second-hand software? Anyone ever had a second-hand car? Second-hand, musical instruments, second-hand refrigerator, second-hand expensive thing because you didn't need a brand new one. Now, second-hand software only shows up in weird corners of eBay where people really want an original shrink-wrapped Windows 95. Because the idea of second-hand software, the people who make it have successfully persuaded it now, you can't sell it. You don't even own it. What you do is you give us all your money, and we give you a license that allows you to use the software as long as you conform to the terms and conditions. But there is a market out there for second-hand software which is not just collectible. And for a long time when I was a kid, this was a thing you could do. Because gaming consoles, the old generations from the 80s and 90s, the software was so intrinsically coupled with the plastic cartridge that delivered it that you could almost treat that chunk of plastic as one license for Sonic Hedgehog. You could play it, and when you were finished, you could sell it. You could go to Blockbuster, you could rent a game for the weekend and try and finish it on Sunday night because your mum was going to take it back when you were at school on Monday. Now, when I was a kid in school, there were two kinds of nerds. There were the computer nerds and the console nerds. And the console nerds, they had skateboards, they shaved their heads, they were always in trouble for setting stuff on fire. The computer nerds had long hair and mountain bikes, and we also set stuff on fire, but we didn't get caught because we were clever. And when it came to gaming, the console kids would borrow Sonic Hedgehog, or they'd go down to Blockbuster and rent the new Mario game. But the computer kids, we had a choice. We could go to a store and we could buy games. We could buy X-Wing. We could buy Eye of the Beholder. We could buy The Secret of Monkey Island. Now, retail price on these was between 20 and 40 pounds in the 90s when you're a teenager with no money. That's like, what do I want to do this month? Do I want to own a pair of jeans, or do I want to play Monkey Island? Do I want to get a Big Mac every day for a month, or do I want to play X-Wing? You know, this was the kind of the economic balance we had to figure out. Or we could dial a pirate. We could phone Steve, who knew a guy, Steve, have you got the new Monkey Island game yet? Now, all of these games had copy protection mechanisms. Sometimes they had hidden sectors on the disks that the game could load, but MS-DOS couldn't see them. And sometimes they had secret decoder rings. There is no copy protection mechanism that will beat bored teenagers with no money. Because we had nothing better to do. It's like, I can stay up and break the copy protection, or I can, I don't know, go and ride my mountain bike in the rain again. We worked out ways to crack the copy protection, and, you know, we knew it was illegal, but we also knew that police had better things to do than prosecute one kid for copying Monkey Island. If you went and sold 100 pirate copies of Monkey Island, maybe the police would get involved. But there was a third way of getting hold of games and software and utilities, because in the back of the computer magazines, there were advertisements for companies that sold free software. And we kind of knew that you were just paying for the disk. What they'd do is you tell them what you wanted, they'd copy it all onto a floppy disk, and then they'd post it to your house. And some of this was genuinely free, as in public domain, as in they didn't even know who created it. Some of it was what's called shareware. They'd send you, a cut-down version of the word processor, and if you wanted the spell checker, you'd mail a check to the author at home, and they'd send you a disk with the spell check module. Some of it was like, hey, I wrote this software, it's really nice, but if you like it, send me a postcard, so I know who's out there in the world using my stuff. One particularly bizarre one, in 1987, Ford Motor Company, they wrote a game called Ford Simulator. The idea was that you would simulate driving a Ford on your IBM PC in 4-color CGA, and you'd enjoy it so much you'd go out afterwards and buy a real Ford. Good game. Yeah, nah, not so bad. I don't think they sold a whole lot of cars. But one of the most successful implementations of this shareware model was pioneered by this guy. This is Scott Miller. He founded a company called Apogee Software. And Scott's parents, they were both in aerospace, so he kind of grew up surrounded by tech and everything. He was a brilliant game programmer, and he'd written a game for the IBM PC called Kingdom of Kroz that was so big it wouldn't fit on a floppy disk. And so he had a good idea. He split his game into 3 episodes, and he said, part 1, it's free. Copy it, give it to your friends, share it. And when you completed part 1, a little screen would pop up saying, hey, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to play parts 2 and 3, send a check for $20 to this mailing address, which was his parents' house in Texas because he was 17 years old. He made about $100,000 selling Kingdom of Kroz. As Apogee Software was kind of gearing up, he's like, there's something in this. I could publish games using this model. He found out about a game called Dangerous Dave, created by a guy called John Romero, working at a company out of Louisiana called Softdisk. He got hold of Romero. He's like, hey, who are you guys? What are you working on? Where's all this stuff coming from? And got introduced to the 2 Johns, John Carmack, John Romero, and their buddy Tom Hall. And they would found a studio called Ideas from the Deep, which later became ID, which later just became id Software. Now, John Carmack is probably the best graphics programmer who has ever lived. If anyone knows a better one, you can come and tell me about them afterwards. Carmack had figured out a way of doing smooth horizontal scrolling on the IBM PC, which everybody, including IBM, said was impossible, and had ported Super Mario to the PC and sent a copy to Nintendo and said, hey, do you want to sell this? And Nintendo went, this is excellent work, lads, well done. Bury it, or our lawyers will find you. Nintendo did not want Super Mario being copied on floppy disks because Nintendo made money out of people buying cartridges. So instead, Scott Miller gets in touch with them and goes, hey, I saw the Super Mario demo. It's really good. I know you can't sell it. Why don't you come up with a new premise, new characters, same technology, put it out through Apogee Software, and we'll publish your game for you. And so they created Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons, where you're a little kid who has absolutely nothing to do with Mario, and you have a pogo stick, which has absolutely nothing to do with mushrooms, and you run around a Martian city trying to save your babysitter from a bunch of aliens. Commander Keen this is one of the first games I ever played. This is one of the games that got me into PC gaming. It was fantastic. The gameplay was great. The graphics were great. It was hugely successful. It made so much money that the Johns quit their job, and they founded their own studio, id Software. And id Software produced some of the defining games in the history of PC gaming. Wolfenstein 3D was the first game where you had degrees of freedom when you were rotating instead of just turning 90 degrees around corners. Doom pioneered network deathmatch and crashed every single college network in America for about 72 hours until they figured out how to block the ports. And Quake was not the first 3D accelerated game. It was not the first true 3D immersive game, but it was the first game that combined these technologies with network gameplay in a way that just created this incredibly immersive, visceral 3D combat experience. Now, these were landmarks in terms of gameplay, game design, and technology. They were also landmarks in terms of distribution. I got Wolfenstein 3D free on the cover of PC Format magazine. I got Doom off a friend of mine at school, and I downloaded Quake from the idsoftware.com website using Netscape Navigator. Because this is 1997 now. This is when the web is starting to think. People are getting the internet at home. Now, if you look closely, the id Software website, you could download Quake in 7 files to put on 7 floppy disks to take back to your house. Because you probably didn't have the internet in your house, but you might have it at work or at school or at college or that kind of. This is that point in history. The internet's a thing, but it probably doesn't come to your front door yet. Now, 1997, this is the point in history where a whole lot of people are getting online. They're getting email, they're getting the web, they're setting up free web space, they're discovering Usenet. And along the way, we discover a community of people who've been online a lot longer than any of us have. And they have ideas about free software which have nothing to do with whether it came on the cover of a magazine. To them, free software is about the 4 essential freedoms. The freedom to run the program however you want for any purpose. This one's freedom 0 because it was retrospectively added later. The freedom to study how the program works and modify it to do what you want. The freedom to distribute copies, and the freedom to share your own modifications. This is the founding principle of the GNU project, established by Richard Stallman in the early 1980s, with the goal of creating a completely free as in beer, free as in speech, free as in freedom operating system. Now, by the end of the 1980s, the GNU project had they produced a lot of the bits. They had a linker, they had a C compiler, they had a text editor. Perhaps more significantly, they had a license. The GNU General Public License, in which a bunch of nerds and a bunch of ideologists sat down with a bunch of lawyers and went, let's see if we can codify the freedoms into something that will actually stand up in a court of law that anybody can use if they want to publish their software and guarantee that software will be free forever. Now, I mentioned they had most of an operating system. What they didn't have was a kernel. This is like saying, hey, I'm going to build a car. Look, I got a stereo, I got a steering wheel, and I've got the indicators and everything. And I'm like, how's the engine coming along? I had a bit of trouble with the engine. You know, the rest is kind of there. And then this guy pops up, Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux in 1991, August 91. He puts a message on Usenet saying, hey, I'm doing a free operating system. It's just a hobby. It won't be big and professional like GNU. It's been brewing since April. It's starting to get ready. Within a couple of months, Linus had published his kernel under the GNU General Public License. So by the start of 1992, for the first time in history, we had a free self-booting operating system. Once you had your Linux or your GNU Linux machine up and running, you could use that to write the next iteration of GNU Linux, and you didn't need to use proprietary software ever again. Now, it's probably a good point to just stop and ask the question, why? Why did all of these people do what they did? Now, in the case of id Software and Carmack and Romero, they love gaming. Like, they love gaming, they love programming, they are nerds, absolutely dyed in the wool. John Romero made so much money out of those that he went out and bought a Ferrari, and then he gave it away in a Quake deathmatch. And then he went back to work the next day working on the next version of Daikatana, because he loves making games, he loves playing games. To them, this was a way to make and play games. Like, write code all day, play games all night, and Shareware will take care of the bills, and that was just a model that worked really, really well for them. For Linus Torvalds, I think he was doing what a lot of us do. Hey, look at me, I made a thing. Look at my thing, validate me, give me attention, it's awesome. And it maybe got a little bit out of hand. But I think for the GNU project and the Free Software Foundation, to them, free software was them executing their ideology. It was taking the ideas that underpinned their movement and turned them into code you could download and code you could use. Now, you'll also notice we're up to about 1998 by now, and nobody is talking about open source yet. And the reason is that phrase did not exist. Now, 1998, what happens? Things start to get interesting because companies want websites. And most companies are running Novell NetWare or Microsoft Windows or one of those big proprietary corporate operating systems. Did any of you folks ever try hosting websites on Microsoft Windows 95? It's not what we'd call enterprise grade. And the web was kind of like they had corporate IT, and then the web was the scrappy kids in the corner going, yeah, we can do a website with a digging picture of a man digging into the road and animated GIFs, all that kind of stuff. And so there was suddenly a demand for network-capable, enterprise-grade operating systems for smart hackers without a whole lot of budget to spend. Now, this is where companies like Red Hat see an opportunity. The software's out there. Apache Web Server exists. There's an early version of PHP floating around. Python exists by this point. I think the first version of MySQL. We can put all this stuff together. We can put it in a box, and we can put a helpline number on the back, and we can sell the free software to companies who want to go into a store and give us money and come home with a web server in a box with a phone number they can call if it doesn't work. Free software. Only $79.99. Now, you see the problem here is you show this to the person at work who controls the budget, and they're like, well, why are we paying the money for why don't we just get the free software? And you try to explain that it's free as in speech and blah, 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 blah. Now, the term open source was coined by this person, Christine Peterson. She's the founder of a thing called the Foresight Institute, which was a technology research institute in San Francisco, and was kind of right at the front row at the exact point all this stuff is kicking off. And she has this lovely quote: those new to the term free software assume it's referring to the price. Old-timers must then launch into an explanation, usually given as follows. We mean free as in freedom, not free as in beer. At this point, a discussion on software has turned into one about the price of an alcoholic beverage. Between meetings that week, I was still focused on a need for a better name and came up with the term open source software. Now, the way she did it, I think, is really clever. I've seen some fantastic sessions this week about kind of how to talk technology to business people and how to get your voice heard in meetings. Christine did not stand up and say, I think we should call it open source software. She just started calling it that. And when some of the alpha male tech bros around the table also started calling it open source software without realizing where they'd got it from, that's when she's like, this is going to work. This is the name that's going to catch on. And it did. Next week, Eric Raymond, Bruce Perens, they created opensource.org. Tim O'Reilly was organizing a massive free software summit in April that year. That very quickly became the Open Source Summit. And the reason why open source became such a big idea and such a hot topic, and why free software didn't do the job, was because of this clause in the GNU General Public License. You may not impose any further restrictions on the recipient's exercise of the rights granted herein. If you publish code under the GNU Public License, you say this is free, you can modify it, you can share it, you can give it away, you can sell it if you want to sell it. But what you cannot do is stop anybody else from taking away any of those freedoms. And the mechanism it uses to do this is interesting, because it uses copyright. If you contribute code to, anyone here got code in .NET? You've signed the contributor license agreement, right? If you contribute anything, you sign it. If you contribute code to Meta, you sign a thing saying, I transfer ownership. If you contribute code to a GNU license project, like the Linux kernel, that's still your code, and you own it. And you have made it available to the rest of the world under the terms of the GNU General Public License. Now, this was purely academic for a long while, until about 2002, this thing came out, the D-Link Linksys WRT54G, which this was a hugely popular network router. They sold about 250,000 of these in the first months of 2002. It was basically a Linux machine with a Wi-Fi chip and a bunch of network ports, like a $100 little network computer with no screen. This is cool. And the reason it was interesting is a guy called Andrew Viklas, who went on to found PagerDuty, if anyone knows that company. He was on the Linux kernel mailing list. He saw news about this. He downloaded the firmware. He decompressed it, unzipped it, had a look. He's like, that looks like a Linux kernel. And that looks like a bunch of GNU software, and this is all GPL. Went on their website. Hey, where's the source code? The reason they wanted the source code, this thing had Broadcom Wi-Fi chips in it. And about 2002, Linux and Wi-Fi they didn't talk to each other. You were in for a week of hell trying to get a Linux machine to connect to a wireless network because the people who made the chips didn't publish Linux drivers for them. And suddenly they're like, there are Wi-Fi drivers in here. We want the drivers, it's GPL. They should give us the source code. Now, this is where the continuity gets a little bit hazy. The Slashdot post from 2003 is still online saying that Linksys released the GPL code for this router, and Linksys has apparently caved to community pressure. Okay, yay, cool. Now, 5 years later, 2008, the Free Software Foundation take Linksys. Now, by this point, Linksys has been acquired by Cisco. Cisco bought a lawsuit. They picked this router company up, and suddenly we might have a problem here, boss, because it turns out Linksys had outsourced the chip development to Broadcom, and Broadcom had outsourced it to somebody we don't know who'd put Linux and GNU software in it without telling anybody, and suddenly Cisco now owns this thing. So Cisco owns the lawsuit. I don't know what happened in the 5 years between publishing the first version and getting sued. I'm guessing Cisco was like, give them some code, they'll go away. And the Free Software Foundation was like, if we can get Cisco in court, we could get a legal precedent that the GNU General Public License is binding. It came close, it didn't happen. Cisco eventually settled out of court. This means Cisco's lawyers said, don't take this to court. We can't guarantee you're going to win. You might lose, and if you lose, it'll be expensive. Now, the Free Software Foundation are not doing this for the money. They're doing this because they want a judge in a court to say the GPL is legally binding. Bang, there we go. Stop worrying about it. The only time that's ever happened is in Germany. A guy called Harald Welter discovered that D-Link was selling a network-attached storage device with GNU software in it, and because he's a contributor to the networking code in the Linux kernel, legally, he's like, they're using my code without publishing the source, so they're violating the license under which I published it. I am the copyright holder. Took them all the way to the Frankfurt District Court, who said, yes, they have to. Now, I don't know what they actually did. The ruling said they have to pay your legal costs and stop selling the device. I don't think D-Link pulled out of Germany on the back of this. We'd have heard about that. But the Frankfurt District Court said, yes, the GPL is a legally binding document. Now, I believe German law isn't based on precedent the way it is in the UK and the United States, so it's not the kind of global victory we were hoping for, but it is a big, fat legal rubber stamp on, yes, the GPL is a real thing. Now, about the time all this is going on, one of the most famous pieces of considered understatement in the history of IT, Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft, is doing a radio interview at a press show, and he says, Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That's the way the license works. Steve is wrong about three things. One, that's not the way the license works. Two, that's not the way Linux works. And three, cancer is not contagious, Steve. You have got it wrong. But apart from that, this is a great soundbite. Now, Microsoft, in the year 2002, they own the desktop. And if they own the desktop, they control, well, you've got our operating system, so you're going to use our word processor, our database, our email software, our everything. We're going to make $100 billion out of dominating computing. They see open source coming along. They see a world where the computer on every desk in every company is running GNU Linux in one of its many variants, and they are absolutely terrified. They have to kill this thing dead before it can get out. They have changed over the intervening 25 years. Today, Microsoft loves open source, and the reason is cloud. Because what cloud has done more than anything else, it has changed the way people pay for software, and it's changed the way digital companies make money. Because instead of, we will write the code, we will sell you the code, give us money, then you go and do whatever you want, now they're like, hey, have the code, it's fine. Have the data, have the structure, have the license. Oh, what's that? You need somewhere to run it? Step into my data center, bring your American Express card. We've invented itemized billing for CPU cycles, which is kind of cool. Now, early in my career, I built servers. Clients would say, hey, we need a new web server. I'd be like, all right. I'd ring Dell. I'd put the order through. Sometimes it would be there same week. Sometimes it would be 2 or 3 months to get the hardware in. It would come in. I'd get someone to help me carry it up the stairs because you couldn't lift one of these on your own. We'd put it in the rack. We'd put Linux on it. We'd put Apache on it. We'd put PHP and MySQL and all the other good stuff and secure it and set all the bits up. And, I'd probably charge them a couple of £100 and then maybe £1,000 a month for maintenance and hosting and all these kinds of things. If I got 50 phone calls one day from 50 clients all wanting a web server by the end of the day, in theory, woohoo, 50 grand payday. In practice, I had to say no. There was just no way I could. It didn't scale. The cloud scales. The cloud is like, well, don't put servers, don't even bother putting racks in data center. We'll have shipping containers with a plug on the back. And when the shipping container stops working, we'll take it away and bring in a new shipping container. And then you sell that forward. You're like, you want to run software? Absolutely fine. Now, a lot of the software that runs in the cloud is free software. It's software licensed under the GPL, the MIT, Apache, BSD. It's software that nobody paid for, except now people are paying for it. And the companies that sell it, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, Google, Alibaba Cloud, they are making a serious amount of money off software that they didn't necessarily contribute to. Let's talk about Sammy the Squirrel. Sammy lives in the woodland with all of the other woodland animals. And every Sunday, they have woodland show and tell. And they go to the glade with the old fallen tree stump, and all of the animals show off all their hobbies and their craft and their projects. And Sammy likes to write computer games. Sammy has created Acorn Adventure, a game totally fictional and not at all based on Sammy's real life experiences, where you play a little squirrel who runs around the forest and tries to collect enough acorns for the winter and not get captured and eaten by the owl. Now, the first week that Sammy takes it along, everyone's very excited. Oh, wow, it's a computer game. The next week, Jeff the raccoon turns up with an arcade cabinet, and it's running Acorn Adventure. And Sammy thinks this is amazing. Like, look, it's my game, running on an actual cabinet with a joystick and buttons and everything. And all the little animals are queuing up to play, and they're bothering their parents. Dad, can I have another 50p so I can play Acorn Adventure again? And everyone is happy and delighted, and this is fantastic. And the next week, Jeff turns up in a brand new pickup truck with 2 arcade machines. And at this point, some of the animals are getting a little bit frustrated because they're like, yeah, the owl is too difficult. I keep getting eaten. The graphics in level 2, they're not great. And this bit's too hard, and there aren't enough acorns in the 3rd bit down by the glade. And Sammy says to them, well, it's fine. It's free software. It's not free to them. They've been paying 50p every time they have a go. Next week, Jeff turns up in a solid gold helicopter. But that's all right. Sammy's been working on something. Sammy is pleased to announce Acorn Adventure 2. Better graphics, better gameplay. The owl isn't quite so clever, and it's still free. Still free to play, still free to take home, free to modify, share it with your friends, do whatever you want. But, if you want to put Acorn Adventure 2 on your pay-to-play arcade machine, you have to give Sammy £1. Oh boy, the woodland animals did not like that. They called Sammy a traitor. Sammy's done an open source rug pull. Sammy is exploiting the community. One of them got so angry, they took the last free version of Acorn Adventure and forked it and called it Open These Nuts. Now, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where Sammy has created a nice thing, put it out in the world for free, verified there's a demand for it, made what I think is a completely reasonable request, and yet suddenly everybody hates them? Or maybe that's not what happened. Maybe Wilbur shows up, Wilbur the Weasel. And Wilbur's like, hey, friend, I notice you've got a lot of outstanding issues on your game there. I can help you with that. I do a little graphics. I do a little sound. Do a little music. People want to pay with a credit card. I can plug you into my payment provider. Absolutely fine, until somebody notices that every time you swipe your MasterCard to play Acorn Adventure, a copy is going to a server in Belarus. They're like, that's not right. And they turn around to find out what Wilbur was up to, and it turns out nobody can find Wilbur the Weasel. And now you mention it, we don't remember seeing them around here before. The world is full of trillion-dollar companies that have made their money by selling open source software. This thing of taking free software, you put it in the cloud and you charge people to run it, has proved to be a hugely successful business model. Now, the folks from the Free Software Foundation, they saw this coming a long way off. About 20 years ago, something was created called the GPL, AGPL. And what this says, the AGPL says, right, we published this code. Now, GNU public license code, you have to give code to anybody who you distribute the software to. If I give you a copy of the binary, I have to give you the source code. If I give you a router with that, I have to give you the source code. But if you're just browsing my website or interacting with it across a network, not a thing, I don't have to give you the code. The GPL is the thing that goes a step further. It says, no, even if someone just accesses your services across the network, you are now legally required to give them a copy of the source code to your platform. Now, there's a lot of code on GitHub and Bitbucket and all these places that is published under the AGPL. This is code that has been used to train models like GitHub and Gemini and Bard and Grok and all of these kinds of things. Now, let us imagine, just for a second here, that somebody out there is working at, I don't know, World of Warcraft. And they're stuck one day, and they ask Copilot for help, and Copilot, the answer that it gives them, it's the right answer, it solves their problem. It just happens to be byte for byte identical to a couple of lines of a GPL code that's up on GitHub somewhere. And they merge that, and it gets deployed, and it gets put into the Warcraft servers. Now, the next day, technically, Warcraft, the publishers of that game, are legally required to give a full copy of the source code to their platform to everybody who interacts with it over a network. Or maybe it's TikTok, or maybe it's Netflix, or maybe it's any one of these massive tech companies where they are figuring out the legalities of allowing their developers to use AI. Now, what do you think is going to happen there? Is that plagiarism, or is that just, will it learn from the same things and it produce the same answer? Because I'm sure I've written code that is coincidentally exactly the same. Like, if x equals 5 then is probably cropped up more than once, right? I don't know who wins and who loses here. I don't know what the exact way that all this stuff is going to play out with. But the important thing to bear in mind with all of this is it all comes down to licensing. It all comes down to when you put your code out into the world for other people to use, you've got to think about under what terms are you doing that? What's in it for you? What's in it for them? And more importantly, what can you do later and what can they do later? Now, the most common what are called permissive licenses, the Apache license, the BSD license, the MIT license. The MIT license is very, very short. This is the whole thing. Everything in .NET is published under this license, apart from it's not Dylan Beattie, it's the .NET Foundation. This license basically says 4 things. We own this, do anything you like, except you can't remove this license and you can't sue us if the software doesn't work. You can't take it and claim you wrote it, but other than that, you can do pretty much anything you want other than sue the people who created it. Now, we already mentioned, if you want to contribute code to something like React, you have to sign Meta's open source contributor license agreement. You convey the copyright. It's not yours anymore. You want to contribute to .NET, they have a contributor license agreement. Most open source projects that are run under the stewardship of commercial companies have some kind of license agreement in place. So why would you write code that you then sign over to somebody else and let them do whatever? What's in it for you? What's the end goal for the contributing developer on one of these projects? Now, for a lot of folks I know, that's the middle step, because writing open source code for Microsoft is their job. They get a salary, they get benefits, they get free money every year to buy hardware and all this kind of stuff. And it just happens that the work they do is published under the MIT license, but that is their job. Microsoft wants this software to exist in the world. There's a lot of people at Amazon who work on platforms like Postgres. That's their day job, and their results are published into the wild. For a lot of people, share code, have fun, that's it, the end. They do what they want to do, they scratch their own itch, they do a Linus Torvalds, hey everyone, look what I made, isn't it cool? And kind of that's enough. But there's a lot of folks out there who are like, I did all this hard work, and I've got this product which a lot of people are using, and a lot of them are making money out of it, and now I don't have enough acorns for the winter, and there's people over there making millions of pounds from running my software. Now, this is my favorite part of this talk, because every time I give it, something else has just happened, which means I have to go and update all of the material and all of the slides. Because 3 weeks ago, I was going to talk about WordPress. Let's talk about fluent assertions. Now, Fluent Assertions is an open source library. Now, this is all the people on the planet. There's about 8 billion. And then this is the ones who are programmers, I don't know, 8 million maybe. And then this is the ones who do .NET. And then this is the percentage of .NET developers who write unit tests. And then this down here, this is the percentage of the unit test developers working in .NET who use a library to make their assertions fluent. And they only have 3 options for how they do that. And Fluent Assertions is one of them. It is a very extensive set of extension methods that allow you to more Now, this was true 2 weeks ago. Today, Fluent Assertions is a very expensive set of extension methods that allow you to more naturally specify the expected outcome. Because about 2 weeks ago, the news broke via a pull request that was quietly merged in the morning with very little fanfare and announcement that Fluent Assertions had been bought by a company called Xseed. And from now on, if you wanted to run it, you would have to give them $129 per developer per year. Now, this is really interesting me for a bunch of reasons. One, this is not code that you deploy to your customers or you run on your website. It's code you use to make your tests pretty. And, that's fine. I think if code is beautiful, people are more likely to work positively with it. I like Fluent Assertion libraries. I like Fluent interfaces. But this is code you can rip out right now, and none of your customers will ever notice as long as you replace it with something else before you mess up. Yeah? So we're not talking about mission criticality here. 2, $129 per developer per year for syntactic sugar over assertion. You can buy JetBrains Rider for that, which is a full-blown IDE with IntelliSense and autocomplete and static code analysis and refactoring tools and basically a whole set of superpowers. Imagine you have no money and then you go to your boss and you're like, we really need $130 per developer per year. And the boss says, all right, just this once. All right, are you going to buy Fluent Assertions or are you going to buy JetBrains Rider? Because, yeah. But the thing about it I thought was, obviously, the community backlash, like, let's tick the boxes. Outrage on GitHub, tick. Nick Chapseth's video, tick. People on social media getting angry, tick. People going, I will never use this library. You were never going to use it anyway. Tick, 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 tick. The people I was particularly interested in were the contributors. Because Fluent Assertions has been around for about 15 years now. And if you go on their GitHub page, the code that is there is contributed by 222 people, actually 221 people, and Dependabot, who is the 3rd most prolific contributor. But the 6th most prolific contributor, I was looking at it, it's like, hey, I know that guy. That's Mikhail. He's a friend of mine. So I dropped him an email. And I was like, hey, is it cool? I'm doing this talk about open source and the Fluent Assertions thing, and you're like one of the most prolific contributors to that platform. What do you think? Are you happy to kind of go on the record? And I got a reply back from him. He'd never signed any document. So there's no CLA, there's no ownership transfer. So this is important to understand. Mikhail wrote some code that he published under the Apache license, which means it will always be his code, but anybody in the world can legally do anything they want with it, including selling it to Xseed. Now, that's my take. I'm not a lawyer. Xseed has a lot of lawyers. I'm guessing their lawyers are happy with it. I discovered the new branches on my phone. Initially, I thought it was a security breach or some kind of supply chain attack. Dennis reached out. Now, Mikhail's company, InfoSupport, they're a consultancy based out of the Netherlands. They're really good with open source. They sponsor all kinds of projects. They use a lot of it. They contribute a lot of it. Apparently, this was the only official thing is you should stop donating money because it's not going to go to us anymore, coming from the things. And that was it. No further thanks for my or InfoSupport's past financial or code contributions. Regardless of their reasons, respect and gratitude seem to have been afterthoughts in this process. Now, if I had been working for 15 years on an open source project that wasn't making me very much money, I have a price. We all have a price. At some point, if somebody put a big enough bag of money on the table, I'm sure I would turn into a bastard for a little while. Give me the money. I want it. I want it. I want it. I don't know the numbers. Dennis Duman, who's the main architect of this project, is under a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't talk about it anyway. But I really liked what happened next, because the folks at InfoSupport, they turned around to Shoodly, which is another library that does almost exactly the same thing. There are some differences, but they're very, very subtle. And said, hi, I'm Nico Janssen. I'm a manager at InfoSupport. We decided to stop sponsoring them. We're going to sponsor you instead. Shoodly gets $200 a month from InfoSupport. And then somebody contributed that thread, this migration guide from Fluent Assertions to Shoodly. Now, I was looking at this. I'm thinking, I see an opportunity here. I see, like there's potentially a product. So I'd like to introduce today, right here, NDC London, I'm launching the Fluent Assertions to Shouldly Migration Tool Enterprise Edition. That tool is this regular expression, and you can use it for the very reasonable sum of $59 per developer per year, which is less than half what it would cost to use Fluent Assertions. Now, it's one of those situations where you're like, all right, there's a lot of stuff here which clearly it's upset people because it was done without respect and without gratitude. The question of whether any of it was actually illegal, well, no one's calling the police over any of this. Is anybody going to sue anybody else? I don't know, probably not. I don't think it's going to happen. You know, I'm speculating here. I'm guessing that there's something in that code base that Xseed want, and I don't think it's $130 per developer per year. I think they want it to yeah, I'm speculating. I don't know if anyone's going to sue anyone. I suspect probably not. It's going to be very angry, and then next week somebody else will do something dumb, like Matt Mullenweg will do another round of WordPress, and we'll all move on. This is the state of open source licensing in 2025. It is you going, I'm going to pick a library for my new project. Now, there have been any number, like I mentioned, .NET is published under the MIT license, permissive license. The copyright for that is vested with the .NET Foundation. Redis, they published all of their code under a BSD license, but with contributor license agreement in place. A couple of years ago, they did a license change. They said the next version of Redis is still free for hobbies and self-hosted, but if you're running it in the cloud for money, you can't use free Redis anymore. Of course, everybody got very angry, and there were forks and people spinning things off. This seems like something recent. Seems like something that has happened within the last couple of years. We're going to skip over WordPress because we don't have the time. Not today. But there's a project called Service Stack. Some of you folks may be using it. Some of you folks might remember using it. Service Stack was and is open source, high-performance message-based API development for .NET. I used Service Stack a lot until in 2014, they turned around and said, we can't make this free anymore. If you want to use this at your job, at your company that makes money, you're going to need to give us a certain amount of licensing per developer per year. So I went to my boss and I was like, hey, do we have any budget? There's this tool that we use to build APIs. And my boss said, what's APIs? That's when I knew I was not going to win that argument. We weren't an API company. You know, the dev team, we built APIs for our code to talk to each other. We didn't sell it. We didn't make any money out of that. But when I was putting this talk together, I pinged Demis Bellot, who's the creator of Service Stack, and I was like, you know, you changed your license coming up on 10 years ago now. How's it all going? I got this great email back from him. I've worked full-time on Service Stack since I left Stack Exchange. Decade of development later, Service Stack software itself has greatly improved, is much more capable than what was possible as a side OSS project. I was willing to take a pay cut to be able to work on it, so I was pleasantly surprised when it ended up making more money than any job I had prior. Now, he left Stack Exchange, who back in 2014 were paying pretty well. I don't know what they're doing now. So he left a good, well-paying job in a kind of first-class tech company, made more money out of licensing open source, allowed our family to be financially independent, given me the freedom to work on whichever features I want. That sounds like winning to me. Like financial independence and work on whatever you like. Service Stack is going from strength to strength. They just dropped version 8. They keep adding new features, support for new messaging protocols and platforms. The people who were using it, a lot of them switched. So my team did. We switched to using NancyFX because we couldn't justify the licensing given our company's business model. A lot of people just paid for it. Some people got upset and they forked it. They went, open these nuts, end service kit. We're going to do a free version. It'll be free forever. And what happened is within a year, they had all the problems which Service Stack had been drowning in. They had the support from people who don't pay anything. They had the feature requests from the people who are never going to contribute anything back. This code is dead. You know, the last contribution to that was 9 years ago. It looked good for about a year, and then they just realized, like I think anybody who forks an open source project that goes commercial very quickly realizes why the open source project did that. Because they get all the bad customers from day one, and all the good ones go over there and start paying for the thing that has value to them. Now let's talk about Wilbur the Weasel. A couple of months ago, there was a supply chain attack in a thing called XZUtils, which is an encryption library used to log into pretty much every Linux computer on this planet. The only reason we discovered it is that Andreas Freund, who's a security researcher at Microsoft, was doing some benchmarking one Friday afternoon and noticed that the login process was using more cycles than it should have done. This is there was no rigorous set of checks and balances. This thing nearly went live, nearly opened a backdoor in just about every system on the planet. Who controlled the backdoor? We don't know. What we know is this. This is the contributor graph for that project. The number one contributor is the person who has driven this project basically by themselves for over a decade. And then this person, Jia Tan, suddenly shows up out of nowhere with prolific commits in response to a lot of angry pressure in discussion groups. You're not merging things fast enough. You need to fix this. You need to fix that. So we've got a sole maintainer working unpaid on a vital piece of infrastructure. They're getting flack and aggro from the community. Somebody pops up, offers to help, does what ends up being a very, very sophisticated combination of a social engineering attack to get the credibility, to get commit and push rights on that, and then a software supply chain attack doing things like deploying binaries to the package managers, which weren't actually the same ones that were being built by the GitHub actions to kind of sneak the code in there. Now, we don't know who this person is. Jia Tan, pop up out of nowhere, that's it. Not sure who they were, not sure where they came from. Is it a person? Is it a bunch of people? Is it a nation-state actor? Is it malware? We have no idea. This person just disappeared, and this is how close they came to the backdoor that almost infected the entire world. Probably we were about a week away from, oops, we've lost control of all the computers and we don't know who owns them now. Now, I absolutely believe that everybody in this room, given all the time and resources, we would all produce good software, secure, fast, performance software. It does the things the users want to do, and all the brackets are in exactly the right places, and the code is beautiful, and the performance is beautiful, and it's got telemetry, and it's not the world we live in. We're under pressure. We have a limited amount of time. We have to show a return on our investment at some point along the way. And for an awful lot of people, we are getting to this point where we are like, all right, time is money. I've put all the time in. What happens now? I've given the code away for free, but is it okay to say it's free unless you do this? It's free unless you do that. It's free unless you do that. Now, there's an underlying principle to all of this, which I think is probably the single most important thing in this entire talk, which is people who share their source code don't owe you anything. Unless you've signed a contract or something that guarantees you support or email or anything, they've put their code out there. So I made this, you might find it useful. That's all you get. You don't get a guarantee that the next version is going to be free unless you have negotiated that guarantee via something like the GNU General Public License. You are not entitled to upgrades. You are not entitled to support. You're not entitled to their email or their WhatsApp or any of this kind of thing. What you've got is code that works and the freedom to run that version of that code for as long as you need it to do your job, run your business, whatever you're doing. And I find it amazing that we've absorbed this idea so deep that there are now people who take it for granted and think it isn't good enough. I use Adobe Creative Cloud to do a lot of my creative stuff. And I pay $50 a month for Creative Cloud, Photoshop, After Effects, Illustrator. I have no choice. I pay. I have to pay because if I don't pay, I can't open my projects. If Adobe turn around next month and go $500 a month, I'm like, oh, how much do I like all of my work from the last 10 years? Maybe. If Adobe turn around and go, sorry, bankrupt, the servers all fell over, we're finished now, I'm like, Pirate Bay, Photoshop crap. You know, I have to pay them every single month to maintain the continuity of being able to do what I do and use the tools I use to do quite a lot of bits of my job. Now, you talk to open source evangelist people about this, they're like, well, you shouldn't be using Adobe products. You know, and to be fair, there are some very, very good products out there. You say to people, what should I be using instead of Illustrator? They say, oh, you should probably be using Inkscape. I'm like, all right, that get you some of the way there. What should I use instead of Photoshop? The GIMP. Like, if you think the GIMP can replace Photoshop, you don't really know what Photoshop is for. I asked someone once, what should I use instead of Adobe After Effects, which is premium studio quality video post-production? They said, oh, you can use Blender. No. Blender and the GIMP is a 1970s cop show that did not get made. It is not a substitute for Adobe Creative Cloud. It does some of the same things up to a point. But, you know, these are professional tools that are established in industries that rely on being able to do them. Now, how are we doing for time here? Yeah, okay, we got 5 minutes. Let's bring this thing home. Now, the Free Software Foundation have established this kind of precedent. I love the ethos behind it. I love the idea that software should just be free and everyone should be happy. It doesn't work in a capitalist society where people have bills to pay. It came out of California in the 1980s, and they were just a little bit decoupled from reality. That's why they invented SMTP. How many of you folks out there have a Spotify account? Yeah, we all pay for streaming music, right? Because we pay for convenience. We don't own any music. Spotify, you don't get to keep anything. You don't get vinyl. You don't get CDs. You just get to listen to whatever you want, whenever you want it. How many of you folks out there have ever tried to get your company to pay for open source? Is it easy? No, they hate that. They have nowhere to put it. They don't even have a box in their financial system for paid for free software because we're nice people. It's just not a thing that happens. If we want to get money out of big companies for open source, companies love cloud because cloud is like Spotify for companies. It's like, I need the new Taylor Swift album right now. I don't want to go to a shop and buy it. I just want to listen to it, except it's not the new Taylor Swift album. It's a 64-core Postgres terabyte cluster. Oh, yeah, put it on my tab. Would you notice if your company's cloud bill went up by 50 quid next month? 500? 5,000? Anyone here worked in a company whose cloud bill every month is 6 figures? Because, yeah, they exist. There are companies out there spending a fortune on this. Now, we're going to do a little thought experiment. We're going to take a Spotify subscription model and see what we'd do if we applied that to NuGet. So I pulled some numbers from the NuGet ecosystem. This is the most downloaded packages that are out there on NuGet. Newtonsoft.json, 142 million downloads every 6 weeks. Tell that next time someone on Hacker News says nobody uses .NET anymore. Now, what I did is I crunched some numbers. I aggregated all of these. That was my estimate for the total number of downloads on NuGet over a 6-week period. So around that, say we got 40 billion downloads going on every month. I had to guess at the number of active users. I assumed that you're all like me and you all download Newtonsoft.json about 10 times a week. That was the model I used. If you don't like it, you can put a different number in. The math is on the website for this. Now we're going to create our subscription model. Most people, 50% of users, are going to use NuGet Premium for free. We got $15 a month, $75, and then Enterprise is going to pay $500 a month. Current usage stats, this gives us about $43 million a month. We're going to keep $3 million so we can host servers and hire lawyers and all that kind of stuff, which means we've got 40 billion downloads over a $40 million distribution part. That's 0.001 cents, US cents, per download. So that's $1 per every 1,000 downloads of your package. Now, this is an insultingly small amount of money. Even Spotify pays more than this, and Spotify is famous for being incredibly stingy when it comes to paying out. But if we had that kind of revenue stream running through this platform, platforms like Automapper and Mock, they would be bringing in about $13,000 a month in revenue just for the convenience of being able to pull binaries off a package manager. You're not buying the code, you're not modifying the license, it's convenience. Now, $13,000 a month, I'm not sure giving Jimmy Bogart that money is a good idea. But it would certainly, this is like hire an assistant. This is hire a team. This is outsource maintenance. Write some proper documentation. You know, this is serious, turn this open source into an enterprise-grade product money. Next tier down, ImageSharp, one of my favorite libraries for .NET. Jim Bob's getting about $3,000 a month. Now, that's not quit your job and do this full-time money, but it's 4 days a week for a couple of months. It's take a week off, or it's, take the family to Disneyland every once in a while to make up for the fact you've been working on your new release every weekend. Right at the bottom of the spectrum, there's platforms, packages like NAudio. I know the guy who runs this. There are very few people who use .NET to do audio because it's just kind of not quite the right tool for the job, but NAudio is brilliant, it works really well. Mark Heath is making $120 a month off his hobby. That's a new laptop every couple of years. You know, it's not change your life money, but it's something. It's a little kind of contribution back. Now, this is probably not going to work because this is capitalism, and the winning move is you take everything that's free and you exploit it until it goes away, and then you find something else to exploit. But it's kind of worked before. Slackware, Red Hat, Debian, SUSE, these companies made money selling free software openly and transparently by saying packaging is a service that is worth something. Convenience is a service that is worth something. If you don't want to pay us, you can go and get the code and you can compile it and build it yourself, or you can come along and use our system and give us a little bit of money and we'll make the whole thing much easier for you. Now, if we turned around tomorrow and said that NuGet or NPM or the Ruby Gems repo, hey, you want to pay for that now? You know what's going to happen. The Woodland folk are going to riot. But something is happening probably within the next couple of years which might be interesting. which is the WebAssembly system interface. Now, WebAssembly is a big deal. WebAssembly is going to unlock all kinds of awesome things, and WASI, the WebAssembly system interface, is a way of saying, I'm going to write my code in C#, and I'm going to publish a WebAssembly package. And if you want to consume my package in Haskell, you can. And if we want to take that combination of packages and give it to somebody who's working in C++, we can. Which means instead of this, hey, I need a library for doing JPEG compression. Well, this one here does .NET, that one there's for Java, that one's for Ruby, that one's for Python. It's like, no, this one does it for WASI. This is the WASI library for doing JPEG compression. That one does movies, that one does PDFs. And so we potentially are on the brink of a cross-platform package management ecosystem, which means we are going to have cross-platform package management solutions. And of course, everybody is going to go, yay, let's make them all free. Well, let's not. Let's stop for a moment and think before we just give all this stuff away for free and then try and figure out later how to get paid for it. Maybe we should come up with a slightly better way of approaching all this. We have done free as in beer, and it's awesome. And there are people all over the world learning to code on free laptops running free software. And there are people and charities and nonprofits and good companies running stuff in the cloud thanks to software that is free as in beer. But we have seen too many instances of people turning around and going, actually, I could really use a little bit of, there's money on the table, I'd like a little bit of my share, and getting this angry reaction from the community. We've seen free as in speech. We've seen open source software where freedom is guaranteed in perpetuity. And we've seen things like the xedutils attack, where one person they got a GPL project, they can't closed source it, they can't shut it down, they can't do anything with it, and the community is pressuring them. It introduces vulnerabilities, it introduces oversight. It's not a pleasant experience for anybody concerned. I want to think about a third kind of free. I want to think about the freedom you get when you wake up and you're like, yeah, it's all right. Actually, I don't have to do anything today. I'm not going to get WhatsApp messages. I don't need to go and hustle and try and sell anything right now. It's probably going to be all right. I am working hard. I am doing difficult work, but it's valuable to me in an ecosystem and an environment which is sustainable. And that's all right. And I know I'm going back to work on Monday. And right now, I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm going to sleep late. I'm not going to stress about anything. I'm going to put the bikes on the van, and I'm going to go out to the beach. Free as in beer, free as in speech. What about free as in a free weekend? Thank you.